Hey everybody, Pastor Kyle and his girls for story time. Hope you guys are ready. This one is going to be exciting. It's called The Warrior Leader. And so let's get started. It says, after Moses died, God gave his people a new leader. His name was Joshua, which means the Lord saves. Joshua was going to lead God's people into a special land that God had promised to give them. By this time, God's people had been wandering around in the baking desert for 40 years. So you can imagine how sick they were of sand and anything yellow and tense and walking and being hot. And how happy they were to reach the edge of the desert and to see their beautiful new home right there in front of them, all cool and green and lovely. You see, there was only one problem: Jericho. Jericho was a city, but it wasn't just any old city. It was a fortress, and it stopped anyone from getting into the promised land. The people looked at Jericho, at the big scary walls around it, at the towering ramparts, at the heavy iron gates bolted shut. Then they looked at each other. What would they do? No one knew, but God knew. God told Joshua what to do. But Joshua must have looked surprised because it was a very odd battle plan indeed, as you'll soon find out. And God made his people a promise. I will always be with you, and I will never ever leave you. If you do what I say, your lives in this new land will be happy and everything will go well. So Joshua gathered his army together, and they had their swords and their spears and their shields. They were ready to fight, fight, fight. But the plan wasn't about fighting. It was about trusting and doing what God said. Joshua's army went marching, marching, and marching. They went marching around the fortress, the city, day after day after day, marching and marching. They're too scared to fight, said the soldiers at Jericho. But they were wrong. God's people weren't scared. They were waiting for God to tell them what to do next. And on the seventh day, it's always an important day, God told his people to march around the city not once, but 7 times. That's an important number. Then God told everyone to make as much noise as they possibly can. Has anyone ever told you to make as much noise as you possibly can? Well, imagine if you added 39,990 other people making that same noise, and you get the idea. It was ear-splitting. And as it turned out, stone-splitting too, because the huge stone walls of Jericho just crumbled to the ground as if they were made of sand. Jericho vanished in a great cloud of dust. See, when God's people worship and sing, God wins the victory. Oh, is that the next page? And so it was that God's people entered their new home, the promised land. It's so green. I didn't even know this was the same story. And they didn't have to fight to get in either. They only had to walk. Joshua said, God has brought you safely here. Now, will you do what he says? Yes, yes, everyone said. We promise, we promise. Only God can make your hearts happy, Joshua said. So don't pray to pretend gods. Oh, no, we won't. Never, never, they said. I'm afraid they didn't keep their promise. They didn't do what God said. And many years later, just as God warned them, things would go badly for God's people. They would lose their home. Enemies would capture them and take them off as slaves. And God's people would scatter into many different lands. But God's plan was still working, always working. And one day, he would give his people another leader and another home. But this home, no one could ever, ever take away from them. And that's the end of tonight's story. Join us tomorrow night for The Teeny Weeny True King. All right, have a good night. Bye.